Hi guys. So today we are going to continue on with The Witches by Roald Dahl. Before we get started, the reflection question that I have for you today is, what is the scariest thing that you've ever experienced? And I want you to describe it. I want you to use details. I want you to make sure that you have lots of information in there about what the scariest thing is that you've ever experienced, and describe it for me as the reader, to give me a good feeling for that. As we get started with this chapter, there are another 3 words that I want you to listen for and think about. Those words are transfixed, revolting, and culprit. And this time around, I'm actually not going to tell you the meaning of those words up front. I want you to listen for them in the text and try to figure out what exactly they mean yourself. So use your context clues, listen to what it's talking about around it, re-listen to a part if you need to, and really try to figure out what those words mean. So this chapter we're going to be reading, it's called Frizzled Like a Fritter. And if you can remember from the last video, our narrator was in a meeting, and it was the meeting of, let's see, what did they call them? The Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. And our narrator kind of described to us that he doesn't think that that's necessarily the case. He was hiding behind that screen, and he's pretty sure that these ladies are all witches. He talked all about how they were all scratching the back of their necks, and then he saw the one go up underneath, and it appeared that that lady was wearing a wig. They were all wearing their gloves and their little hats. So maybe in this chapter we'll find out a little bit more about that. Here's the picture to start this chapter. There, the witch. Here. Or the lady. I guess we don't know if it's a witch yet. I'm just assuming. Okay. All the women, or rather the witches, were now sitting motionless in their chairs and staring as though hypnotized at somebody who had suddenly appeared on the platform. That somebody was another woman. The first thing I noticed about this woman was her size. She was tiny, probably no more than 4.5 feet tall. I guessed about 25 or 6. And she was very pretty. She had on a rather stylish, long black dress that reached right to the ground. And she wore black gloves that came up to her elbows. Unlike the others, she wasn't wearing a hat. She didn't look to me like a witch at all, but she couldn't possibly not be one. Otherwise, what on earth was she doing up on that platform? And why, for heaven's sake, were all of the other witches gazing at her with such a mixture of adoration, awe, and fear? Very slowly, the young lady on the platform raised her hands to her face. I saw her gloved fingers unhooking something behind her ears, and then she caught hold of her cheeks and lifted her face clean away. The whole of that pretty face came away in her hands. It was a mask. As she took off the mask, she turned sideways and placed it carefully upon a small table nearby, and when she turned around again and faced us, I very nearly screamed out loud. That face of hers was the most frightful and frightening thing I had ever seen. Just looking at it gave me the shakes all over. It was so crumpled and wizening and shrunken and shriveled. It looked as though it had been pickled in vinegar. It was so fearsome and ghastly a sight. There was something terribly wrong with it, something foul and putrid and decaying. It seemed quite literally to be rotting away at the edges, and in the middle of the face, around the mouth and cheeks, I could see the skin all cankered and worm-eaten, as though maggots were working away in there. There are times when something is so frightful you become mesmerized by it and can't look away. I was like that now. I was transfixed. I was numbed. I was magnetized by the sheer horror of this woman's features. But there was more to it than that. There was a look of serpents in those eyes of hers as they flashed around the audience. I knew immediately, of course, that this was none other than the Grand High Witch herself. I knew also why she had worn a mask. She could never have moved around like that in public, let alone book it at a hotel with her real face. Everyone who saw her would have run away screaming. "The doors!" shouted the Grand High Witch in a voice that filled the room and bounced around the walls. "Are they chained and bolted?" Okay, I'm going to show you first the picture of the beautiful lady that we saw first. There she is. Right here. Now, get ready. I'm going to show you the picture for who she really is after that mask comes off. Are you ready? Here we go. Oh, I think it might be too scary. Okay, prepare yourself. Here we go. And there she is with her wrinkles and maggot-like eaten face. No wonder our narrator is terrified. "The doors are chained and bolted, Your Grand Highness," answered the voice in the audience. The brilliant snake eyes that were set so deep in that dreadful, rotting, worm-eaten face glared unblinkingly at the witches who sat facing her. "You may remove your gloves," she shouted. Her voice, I noticed, had that same hard metallic quality as the voice of the witch I had met under the conker tree. Only it was far louder and much harsher. It rasped, it grated, it snarled, it scraped, it shrieked, and it growled. Everyone in the room was peeling off her gloves. I was watching the hands of those in the back row. I wanted very much to see what their fingers looked like and whether my grandmother had been right. Ah, yes! I could see several of them now. I could see the brown claws curving over the tips of the fingers. They were about 2 inches long, those claws, and sharp at the ends. Here's the picture there of the hands. "You may remove your shoes," barked the Grand High Witch. I heard a sigh of relief going up from all of the witches in the room as they kicked off their narrow, high-heeled shoes, and then I got a glimpse under the chairs of several pairs of stockinged feet, square and completely toeless. Revolting they were, as though the toes had been sliced away from the feet with a carving knife. "You may remove your wigs," snarled the Grand High Witch. She had a particular way of speaking. There was something sort of a foreign accent there. Something harsh and guttural, and she seemed to have some trouble pronouncing the letter W. As well as that, she did something funny with her R. She would roll it around and round in her mouth like a piece of hot pork crackling before spitting it out. "Remove your wigs and get some fresh air into your spotty scalps," she shouted, and another sigh of relief arose from the audience as their hands went up to their heads and all of the wigs, with the hats still on them, were lifted away. There now appeared in front of me row upon row of bald female heads, a sea of naked scalps. Every one of them red and itchy looking from being rubbed by the lining of the wigs. I simply cannot tell you how awful they were, and somehow the whole sight was made more grotesque beneath those frightful, scabby, bald heads. The bodies were dressed in fashionable and rather pretty clothes. But it was monstrous. It was unnatural. Oh, heavens, I thought. Oh, help. Oh, Lord, have mercy on me. These foul, bald-headed females are child killers, every one of them. And here I am imprisoned in the same room, and I can't escape. At that point, a new and doubly horrifying thought struck me. My grandmother had said that with their special nose holes, they could smell out a child on a pitch-black night from right across the other side of the road. Up till now, my grandmother had been right every time. It seemed a certainty, therefore, that one of the witches in the back row was going to sniff me out at any moment. And then the yell of, "Dog's droppings!" would go up all over the room and I would be cornered like a rat. I knelt on the carpet behind the screen, hardly daring to breathe. Then suddenly I remembered another very important thing my grandmother had told me. "The dirtier you are," she said, "the harder it is for a witch to smell you out." How long had it been since I last had a bath? Not for ages. I had my own room in the hotel and my grandmother never bothered with silly things like that. Come to think of it, I don't believe I'd had a bath since we arrived. When had I washed my hands and face? Here's the picture of the witches. All removing their wigs with their nasty fingernails and claws and their scabby heads and spots on their scalps. Certainly not this morning, and not yesterday either. I glanced down at my hands. They were covered with smudge and mud and goodness knows what else. So perhaps I had a chance after all. The stink waves couldn't possibly get through all that dirt. Okay, now on the next video, you're going to hear the rest of this chapter. I want you to think about what you think is going to happen next. I'm going to stop because it is kind of long and we have a little bit more to go in this chapter and I don't want the video to be too long. So we'll stop right there. We've learned that our narrator hasn't taken a bath in a while and hasn't washed his hands. So I wonder if Grandmama was going to be right.